Is Mark Carney about to betray his own father's legacy to appease the liberal mob? Or could he finally dismantle the myth of things like the unmarked graves that's poisoned Canada's soul since Kamloops? Brian Giesbrecht is a retired Manitoba judge, a senior fellow at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, and he just wrote an amazing column up at westernstandard.news. Check it out. Carney's father taught in the Indigenous school system. Brian, welcome back to the Richard Sarrett Show. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Just give us a little bit of the background. His father, Robert Carney, of course, Mark Carney was born in Fort Smith up in the Northwest Territories. So his father taught in the Indigenous school system up there. Is that right?
Well, he taught at the schools in the north. He taught in schools. He was an administrator and he was a professor. He ran the full gamut. He was a very distinguished man and an authority on education. By the time he finished his career, he was quite well known, and he was an expert on education matters. But he wrote a very important submission to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in 1996 about residential schools, and you can still find that paper online. So he had experience. Robert Carney had experience in all aspects of education, but northern education and the education of the Indigenous people in the far north was something that he was an expert on.
Right, and as you point out, I believe in your column, he wrote, in certain circumstances, he wrote glowingly about the residential schools and what an important role they had in certain communities, correct?
Oh, absolutely. These were days when you could write sensible things about residential schools without being called a denier. Today, he would be called a denier because he definitely was very positive about some parts of the residential school system. He had various criticisms, and he had lots to say about them. But generally, he was his overall view was that they were necessary and that they were an important part of the education of the Indigenous people. Yes.
Is this widely known that Mark Carney, the current Prime Minister's father, was involved in the residential school system, and I mean, how did this come to light?
Well, one of the members of our research group, Michelle Sterling, is rather an expert on Robert Carney, and a part of her education involved Mr. Carney. There's another person in our group who actually knew Robert Carney personally. He was a student in one of Robert Carney's university classes in Edmonton. So we've known about Robert Carney for a long time, and we have all of his papers, and you can find them all online. You can find a lot of information about Robert Carney. But I rather suspect, I'm not. I don't know this, but I rather suspect that Mark Carney hasn't advertised this fact because nowadays, if you say residential schools, you're expected to say that they were all horrible places where people were treated terribly and there were secret burials. It isn't so. There was always controversy about residential schools because you were trying to do something very difficult. You were trying to provide an education to people from an entirely different culture. Mm-hmm. But in Robert Carney's time, there was rational discussion allowed about residential schools, and you didn't have to pretend that everything about them was bad.
Right.
So Robert Carney had a lot to say about residential schools, positive and negative, but overall he was very positive about residential schools.
Well, this is where it gets interesting because, as we well know, this is the official narrative now of the Liberal Party that, Indigenous children were basically murdered in their sleep by Catholic priests and nuns and thrown into, mass graves in this idiocy. But if Mark Carney I mean, I guess if this gets out further to other reporters and they're willing to pick up this mantle, and I highly doubt it, but how will Mark Carney reconcile his father's documented praise for residential schools, again, with the Liberal Party's stance that they were instruments of genocide? How is he going to handle that, do you suppose?
Well, I'm hoping he'll do it with a little more common sense than what Justin Trudeau did. In my view, and this is not meant to be political because I am not a political person. I'm an admirer of Stephen Harper, but I'm also an admirer of Jean Chrétien, so I'm not partisan. But at the same time, Justin Trudeau's approach to residential schools was bizarre. He immediately assumed, for instance, when the Kamloops claim was made, that it was true. Now, it was the Liberal government reaction to the residential school claim, the unmarked grave claim, that in large part made it into such a big deal. If they had just done a little bit of investigation into it right from the beginning, this would have been a flash in the pan. There never would have been all of this hoopla over this false claim from Kamloops. So I'm hoping that Mark Carney, who seems to be a more common sense type of person than Justin Trudeau, will acknowledge the fact that residential schools were an attempt to educate Indigenous children. Some minor fraction of Indigenous children went to residential schools, and some of them had bad experiences there, but many of them also had very good experiences. So I'm kind of hoping that there will be a more common sense type of approach. But particularly, I hope they'll say to people now, tell people, look, these claims about the thousands of missing children and secretly buried children are just not true. So we'll see what Mark Carney says, but I'm hoping he'll be a little more sensible about it than Justin Trudeau was.
Right. I mean, it's hard to imagine how Carney could lead a party that has branded his father's colleagues as genocidal without either rejecting that label or distancing himself from his own roots. I mean, the narrative implicates Robert Carney. I mean, one has to wonder, how will Mark Carney thread that needle?
Oh, yeah, I know, and it's going. We'll see. I guess we'll see a bit of his a show of his political skills and how he does it. But I am hoping that he will say something a little more common sense. Now, some of the members of his party are not going to like it because you have some of the very extreme voices who want to continue this nonsense that the schools were these houses of horror where horrible things happen and only bad teachers mistreated children. One of the reasons I wrote this article was to show that, no, the people who taught at these schools, the teachers, the priests, the ministers, the nuns, etc., were just normal Canadians. As a matter of fact, many of the teachers who taught at residential schools also taught at other schools. They would go back and forth. So this nonsense that the teachers were somehow some sort of ogres who took delight in mistreating Indigenous children has always been quite crazy. Many of the people, and I know some of them, I actually know some of the teachers, were excellent teachers, just like Robert Carney, and they wanted to do their best to help educate Indigenous children. So one of the reasons I wrote this article is to show that normal Canadians, ordinary Canadians, worked at these schools as teachers. They worked there as maintenance people, dormitory supervisors. Many of the people were actually Indigenous who worked at these schools. So there was nothing terrible about these places. There are reasons why a lot of the children who attended there had very bad experiences, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that the residential schools were used as not just as schools, but as child welfare places. So you had children from terrible backgrounds who were placed in those schools, and that definitely caused a problem. And those children really don't do well anywhere. But as far as the people who were actually running the schools, teaching at them, etc., they were normal Canadians. And yes, I'm sure you had some bad ones, but overall, most of the people working at those schools were conscientious teachers and people just like Robert Carney.
And I think it's fair to point out that, the Conservative Party, not immune from this hysteria. We had, and you point this out, I think, in your column, Pierre Poilievre back in 2008 when he was in Stephen Harper's cabinet, tried to take a more rational approach to this whole narrative, and he was slapped down by the Prime Minister for that, just the same way that British Columbia's Conservative leader, Rustad, took Dallas Brody to the woodshed.
It was exactly, yes, there are parallels there. In 2008, what Poilievre had said on a radio interview was that, and I thought it made perfect sense. He said that the people who had been harmed at the residential schools should be compensated, but the people who simply went there and even had good experiences shouldn't. But Harper, and I think he was very wrong here, he insisted that everybody who went to the school should be compensated, and that has set the trend now. And that's what's happening with a lot of these settlements. The day school people, a lot of your listeners might not know that it's not just the residential school people that were compensated for their time at residential school. Everybody who went to a day school received the same kind of compensation as the residential school people. And the only people, this is ironic, but the only Indigenous people who received no compensation are those that never went to school. And there's something wrong with that because, so Poilievre, in short, Poilievre was absolutely right. The people who were harmed should have been compensated. The people who were not harmed should not have been compensated. But he paid a price for that. He was in the political doghouse for years.
What's the public reaction to your column thus far? I mean, given the backlash, for example, that Candace Malcolm at Juno News just received for, reporting on Carney's daughter who went to the Tavistock Gender Clinic. Are you receiving any similar backlash from either the mainstream media or the public for writing this?
Well, I'm used to it by now. The first column I wrote about residential schools, and this is a long time ago now, when the TRC report came out, and I wanted to simply point out that some of the things I've just said now, that no, there were many people who did quite well at residential schools. As a matter of fact, a lot of most of the leaders, Indigenous leaders of the past generations, went to residential school, in spite of the fact that in total only about less than a third of status Indians attended. I said those things. I thought they were very common sense things, but I was labeled a denier, similar to a Holocaust denier. And at that point, I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue writing about this or just stop because I don't like being called names? And I made the decision, no, I'm just going to continue writing what I thought was common sense about and truth about residential schools. So I'm definitely... I face a lot of criticism and I'm called names, but I don't particularly care.
Well, thank God that you continue to write about these things. You're giving others courage, and you're basically paving the way so that we can have these conversations. It's okay to have these conversations. It's absolutely essential to have these conversations, and hopefully, counter the liberalist obsession with rewriting history. Brian, thank you so much for everything that you do and for coming on the program again.
Oh, very welcome. Nice to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Brian Giesbrecht, retired Manitoba judge, senior fellow with the Frontier Center for Public Policy. I'll place a link for this amazing column that he wrote for the Western Standard in the episode notes when we publish the podcast later tonight. And you can get the podcast everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Hey, this is Richard Serrett. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe.